Hello all, and welcome to our Strengthening Democracy and Improving Our Communities Across All Levels of Government, the United States Experience session. We'll soon be hearing from our guest speakers from federal, state, local, and tribal SLTT panelists across all levels of the U.S. First and foremost, this event is open to the public and is being recorded. Courtney, next slide. So all those who are attending, the names of who attend, the meeting notes, the video, all of it will be posted to the open.usa.gov website. The presentation and agenda we posted sooner, probably this evening. The video could take up to a week, depending on how long GSA takes to process it. As you probably already could tell, this session is a little bit different than some of the others we've had in the past. Today's session is less of a community discussion and more of a directed conversation around exploring ways in which the open government approaches are strengthening democracy and improving communities. To that end, we're hosting this session using Zoom's webinar features, and we'll be using the Q&A box to help field questions from our state, local, tribal, and territorial panelists a little later on. You'll see it coming up in a bit if I think they're right after me. You can find the Q&A button at the bottom. So you click the button, type in your question, and when the question's answered, the rest of the members will be able to see it. Looks like someone just sent one in. If you need to get in touch with myself or any of my team here at GSA, you can use the chat button in order to chat the hosts and panelists. So that's down there next to the Q&A. And with all that logistics stuff out of the way, I'm going to, it's my pleasure to introduce Ms. Jen Lewis, who is the Senior Advisor for Open Government at the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy, to get our session kicked off. Take it away, Jen.
Thank you so much, Dan. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this very exciting Open Gov Week event on strengthening democracy and improving our communities, really across our entire country. Again, my name is Jen Lewis, and as Dan mentioned, I serve as the Senior Advisor for Open Government at the White House OSTP, but I also serve as a Senior Anti-Corruption Advisor and our team lead for Technical Leadership and Global Programming at the U.S. Agency for International Development. The White House Office of Science and Technology Policy works to harness the power of science, technology, and innovation to achieve America's greatest aspirations and tackle our biggest challenges. The U.S. Agency for International Development, or USAID, as you may be familiar, is the U.S. government lead and the world's premier international development agency, providing assistance on behalf of the American people around the world to help countries address the root causes of violence, generate economic opportunity, and create innovative solutions for a wide range of challenges, as well as advancing democracy, governance, and peace. From day one, President Biden's vision has included creating better mechanisms to receive direct feedback and engage with the people, organizations, and communities that our government is intended to serve. He often talks about building an inclusive democracy that responds to the will of the American people. I'm honored to be moderating today's session, which seeks to explore ways in which open government approaches are strengthening democracy and improving communities at all levels of government across the United States. We're thrilled to be joined today by a diverse group of colleagues from across the country and at the federal level to unpack these experiences and connect them to the vital work of transparency, community engagement, and public participation around the world. And so I'd like to just take a few minutes to talk about what we mean by open government and how it is being fostered at the global, national, and local levels around the world. In 2011, President Obama joined with the heads of 7 other nations to join the Open Government Partnership, or OGP, a voluntary global alliance between governments and civil society to advance transparency and accountability, to bolster citizen engagement, and to harness new technologies to strengthen democracy. At the core of OGP is a belief in people-centered governance and a pledge to transform the way the public sector serves, accounts to, and engages with its people. Initially a partnership of countries only, today OGP includes 75 member countries and over 150 local government members who come from cities, countries, provinces, and states around the world, from Buenos Aires in Argentina to Kaduna State in Nigeria, to Northern Ireland, to our friends right here in Austin, Texas, in Los Angeles, California, and New York, New York. Today, the partnership includes governments representing more than 2 billion people around the world and covering more than 5,000 commitments to engage and serve the public on everything from monitoring of air quality to improving legal aid and access to justice to public access of government contracts. And 13 years on, the core tenets of OGP and the broader open government movement, those of transparency, participation, and engagement, are more relevant today than ever. Indeed, they are vital to both reinforcing trust and ensuring that democracies deliver for people. In the United States, we are fortunate to not only serve as a founding country and global supporter of OGP, but to be building on a strong legacy and tradition of participatory democracy across our many governments. And that's why we're so happy to be co-hosting today's event as part of the Global Open Gov Week with our colleagues at the U.S. Open Government Secretariat, which is housed within the U.S. General Services Administration. Today is a chance to join colleagues from around the world in celebrating and reinforcing the values of transparency and public engagement, and to hear from open government work pioneers in our own country. And with that, I'd like to briefly introduce the flow for today's session, as well as our esteemed guests. We'll first be hearing from a diverse panel of leaders from across our country, from Arkansas, Texas, New York, and from the Cherokee Nation, who will share their experiences implementing open government practices. We will then move into a moderated panel discussion and have time for audience Q&A. We'll then hear briefly from leaders across our federal government, from the Departments of Justice and Treasury, and from the White House Office of Management and Budget about national efforts to leverage openness and transparency for the American people. And finally, we will close with a brief overview of how this work is connecting with global open government efforts, including our support to OGP. And with that, I'd like to transition us right to the very first of our series of presentations, and an exciting presentation from our colleagues in the city of Austin, Texas. Over to you, Daniel.
Thanks, everyone. My name is Daniel Collada. I'm the Chief Innovation Officer from Austin, Texas, and I am so happy to be here speaking with you all today about the good open government partnership work we've been doing here in Austin, as well as all the amazing efforts that have been going on across the country and across the world. To give a little bit of an overview of our experience here in Austin, Austin was one of the first, if not the first, local member of OGP worldwide, which was a fun experience and a fun distinction. We've done 2 action plans and are working on our third right now. We began our first action plan in 2016, and that action plan focused a lot on figuring out what a local government version of an action plan and an OGP process even was. So we had 2 kind of themed initiatives, one around homelessness and another around creating an equity assessment tool for the city organization. And then we had 3 other commitments that were more internal, creating an open governance operating board, a project tracking system, also doing some work on public meetings here in the city. The Office of Innovation was the lead on all of those projects because we were really bringing the OGP framework and program to the city. So we had a lot of work that we did there, and of course collaboration with civil society partners in all of those cases, and some amazing collaboration and creativity there. On our second action plan, which was 2019 through 2020, I believe, a 1-year action plan, we did more thematic commitments, and the Innovation Office was the lead from the city side only on one of them. So we really tried to support and help others that were doing good work bring the OGP framework to those projects. So there was a climate resilience pilot project, anti-displacement project, and specifically to bring more public participation in there. public safety data analysis, as well as inclusion in community court contracting. So those were really interesting and got a little more specific and thematic, and pulled in another great group of civil society partners. We concluded that work in 2020, and now we are planning our third action plan, which we're going to focus more on anticipatory and strategic foresight elements that we can bring into our projects and processes, as we have lots of new exciting things going on here in Austin. So we've really loved being part of OGP over the years. We've learned a lot. The connections we've made both within our civil society partners and across the world and across the nation have been amazing. We really feel like we're in a community and network here, and all finding really creative and collaborative ways to advance open government principles, create new connections, and do this work better together. So I'll leave that as our intro here, and pass it to our next local panelist.
Thank you so much, Daniel. And yes, I should have mentioned at the outset the pioneering nature of the city of Austin being part of the OGP local program, which really was the first effort to try to bring this global partnership down to the local level where citizens experience, where communities experience it most. So thanks very much for that. I'd now like to turn the floor to our colleagues from the city of Little Rock, Arkansas.
Thanks, Jen, and thanks so much for the opportunity to be here today. My name is Amber Jackson, and I have the pleasure of serving as Chief Equity Officer in the City of Little Rock under Mayor Frank Scott Jr. I'm here today on behalf of my colleague, Marquise Willis, our Chief Data Officer, who's sorry he couldn't be with you, but we are very grateful for this opportunity. Next slide, please. First, I want to give a shout out to the Arkansas Center for Research and Economics. They are who connected us with you all for this panel discussion, and they've been doing some great work in the state of Arkansas to encourage open government and transparency. ACRE, as they're known, has published biennial reports that review local government transparency based on a number of factors, and last year they expanded their research to include city governments. Since they began reporting in 2018, the amount of what they've identified as critical public information published online has risen from about 15% to 37% among local governments in the state. Next slide, please. So today I want to focus on some work that we have done in about the past year and a half since our Chief Data Officer was appointed. And I've framed this overview in light of key open government policies. So first, I'll briefly review data standards and policies that we've developed, and then focus on right to information, anti-corruption and integrity, fiscal openness, inclusion, and digital governance. Next slide, please. So the first place that our Chief Data Officer wanted to begin as we began this citywide focus on data and reporting was to establish some standards. So we started with address collection. We aligned those with the national 911 standards. These are particularly important when we are utilizing technologies such as GIS mapping. Similarly, with demographics, I worked closely with Marquise to develop standards that are in line with the Office of Management and Budget, again, at the federal level. And then he has also worked closely together with me to develop use and storage of data policies that have equity considerations. So thinking about why are we collecting what data, on whom, how are we storing it, all of that. Next slide, please. On to right to information. So we're all about accessibility of information and access for our public. We have created a Freedom of Information Act request log that is available at our city attorney oversees those here at the city, and it's available online. Folks can see who has made requests and the status of those requests. We also have a capital improvements dashboard. In the city of Little Rock last year, we passed a bond measure to do a lot of street improvements. And our residents can go online and see in real time by ward. We have 7 wards in our city active in their completion. On to anti-corruption and integrity. This year, we have launched the ROC Folio. It has 2 parts. The first part is the ROC Review. This is our first citywide public report card. Our chief data officer worked with each of our department directors and division leads across the city. We have about 16 departments to develop key performance indicators, which we will be reporting on publicly. And I have to give a quick shout out to my colleagues from New York. I believe Marquise got this idea when we were visiting Bloomberg Harvard in the fall from a member of your team. And so we're very glad to bring that to the city of Little Rock. The second part of the ROC Folio is what we're calling our city wallet. And so this tracks publicly online ARPA spending, contract spending at the city of Little Rock, as well as our employee salaries. Next slide, please. Now on to inclusion. We've done some exciting projects. We're very excited to have launched this one in particular about a month ago. It is a minority business enterprise map. It's a map in which minority-owned businesses can opt in. They can designate whether or not they are certified minority by the state. It has a profile of each business, and when you click on it, it will actually take you to where it's located on the map. If you'd like to see it for yourself, it's at littlerock.gov/opportunity. This is very much a work in progress. We are currently working to adapt it to be a little more mobile friendly, but we are excited to offer this tool to anyone who is looking to do business intentionally in our city. Next slide. And so also in the realm of inclusion, population data in Little Rock, we have a total population of about 203,000 currently. And although immigrant communities are more difficult to track in terms of surveys, we estimate that about 10 to 15% of our adult population speaks only Spanish. And so this has highlighted a critical need in local government for access to information, access to our public meetings, our board meetings where the majority of governance happens. And so we have settled on leveraging AI as part of our access strategy. We've just launched this month and have an RFP that's going out to be able to offer this citywide on a more permanent basis. Next slide, please. And then speaking of AI, as part of our digital governments, our chief data officer has worked closely with our information technology director to develop an AI rollout and action plan to ensure that we are harnessing AI to effectively and efficiently govern, but also paying close attention to things like privacy. All right, and with that, I'll just say, I know Marquise and I share a love of connecting with our fellow colleagues in government across the country. We encourage you to reach out anytime. And thank you for your time. I'll pass it over to the next panelist.
As the next panelist comes on, I just wanted to remind folks to use the Q&A box for your questions for the panelists. That we're not going to be reading the chat. So just if you have a question for the panelists, please put it in the Q&A box.
Thanks so much, Dan, for that reminder. And thank you, Amber, for that inspiring presentation. It's fantastic to see all the work that's happening in Arkansas, the work that's happening in Little Rock. And putting it in context, I know this has been really an inspiration from your team and your office. And so it's exciting to see where this is going. So now I'd like to turn the floor to one of our newest members of OGP Local, the City of New York, which was just elected in as part of the partnership earlier this year. So over to New York and to Betsy. Thanks.
Thanks, Jennifer. Hi, everyone. I'm Betsy McLean. I'm the Chief Policy and Innovation Officer for the City of New York. Super thrilled to be here and to be kind of the new kid on the block as part of the crew. So, I wanted to talk a little bit about, what we set up as our kind of mayor's office of engagement. Can I have the next slide, please? And before I do that, I just kind of want to talk about why. What we really set out to do is kind of center community engagement at everything that government does as kind of a core function of government, which, kind of understanding what democracy is, you would think that that is the kind of normal kind of way of business, of doing business with government, but I think we've all been kind of on the receiving end of maybe either processes that are opaque or that there are kind of no route in for community members. So that's really what we're trying to do, is kind of center New Yorkers and really think about everything that we do as a partnership between folks in government and New Yorkers. It's also bigger than that, right? I really love this quote from Senator Warnock: democracy is the political enactment of a spiritual idea, the sacred worth of all human beings. The notion that we all have within us a spark of the divine and a right to participate in the shaping of our destiny. And I like to have that quote, I have it up on my desk. I talk about it all the time because I think it's both the idea that what we're doing here is about connecting to each other and to connecting to something bigger than ourselves, which I think is really essential for all kinds of things, from well-being to resilience to really good policy and programs. Next slide, please. Again, we really think about democracy as a team sport, government community working hand to hand to shape, our city for all of us. We recognize that our work is to make engaging with the city easy, consistent, and meaningful. And then the work of New Yorkers is to join us in the collective endeavor that is city making. So we set out to kind of create this office. It's never existed before. We are blessed, I will say, in New York City, we are blessed with a bunch of infrastructure, community engagement infrastructure, both within government and certainly outside of government. Super robust civic institutions, community-based organizations, religious institutions, all of the institutions, business, small business institutions, block associations, all of that stuff. We've actually sought to kind of map all of it, and it's almost impossible to do because there's so much going on. And then I will say that within government, we also have both mayor's offices that are dedicated exclusively to community engagement and kind of in different ways. And then within some of our, I think it's 50-some agencies, kind of specific, whether it's a housing agency, economic development agency, health, that have outreach teams. Our vision here was to kind of transform New York City into a national model of collaborative, inclusive, and accountable governance that strengthens democracy, expands civic engagement, and enhances civic trust, which we know in this moment is not where we'd all love to see it. To be able to do that, we're really working to build out our civic infrastructure. So not just the kind of the agencies, the teams, but also the practice, the process, the supports, and the data that facilitate inclusive, accessible, consistent community engagement and government community collaboration. Next slide, please. So here's our goals. We want to maximize community engagement. We want to improve its quality. We want to coordinate and align community engagement efforts. Part of both the beauty and the pain of living in such a big city is that our government is huge. We have lots of different agencies who are engaging communities at lots of different points on lots of different issues. They're not always coordinating those efforts, which makes it, as kind of a New Yorker, sometimes you feel like, don't you guys talk to each other? And also kind of like want to make sure that we're kind of getting the most bang for our buck and respecting the time of their with their input, their insights. The other thing that we really want to do is amplify community input in all programs and policy making. So I'll talk about that a little bit later. Next slide. So we kind of do that in 3 ways, both kind of the coordination and collaboration component that I talked about. Just, when we kind of first kicked off this office in 2022, we kind of hosted a big meeting with all of the different outreach and engagement teams from across city agencies. And it was really the first time that that had ever happened, that everyone had been in a room together. And that itself was transformative. Like all of a sudden people had, people had their people in other agencies to call when they had questions, when they were going to go into a neighborhood where they knew another agency had been working. And that in itself, just connecting those dots is so incredibly important. So that's been great, and has really turned into kind of a peer learning forum where folks can share their work, but also we can bring in kind of best practices. So that kind of hits to the technical assistance component, where we're not assuming that everyone is great at community engagement, like that you're born to it. It's stuff. It's hard stuff to do. It takes practice, and there's lots of really great examples out there to really learn from and to kind of hone your craft. So that's another kind of role that we play as an office, to provide support and technical assistance to agency outreach and engagement teams, and to make sure that when folks need stuff like tools and templates and best practices, that it's easily accessible. So then last but not least is kind of community data. So we have, as I'm sure you all have, just like endless amounts of quantitative data, like endless, that you trip over, like the data, just like all over the place. And that's all kind of data that's coming from government. What's much harder for us is to have community generated data, qualitative data that we can then use to inform policies and programs. The result is when we're making decisions based on quantitative data, government generated quantitative data alone, we're only seeing part of the picture, right? That we really need to be able to see kind of what is the New Yorker's lived experience that informs these various data points, so that we can make better decisions and design better policies and programs. And then I think the other thing that we're really interested in doing is really thinking about what are the metrics of success and how are we tracking impact. We know that engaging community members has a bunch of, there's certainly the quantitative metrics, how many people showed up at the meeting, what neighborhoods are they from, what are their races, ethnicities, what are their backgrounds, what's all of that stuff. But what we don't do such a good job of is like, how did this land with folks? What do they do with the information afterwards? How are they able to see themselves reflected in the policy that we developed as a result of their input? And we know that that stuff has a real impact on people's lives, on both their sense of agency and their overall well-being. So those are things we're really interested in kind of building out more of. So when we first came in, this administration first came into office, we did a big policy survey called NYC Speaks. And some 70,000 people responded. Our next version, kind of following up on the policy survey, policy and priorities, is really about well-being. It's about how are New Yorkers doing? Like how are folks doing in the broad sense of purpose, of hope, of sense of agency and kind of connectedness and belonging. Next slide, please. I think this is just like a super important thing to really kind of, and it's been like kind of a constant lesson for me, is that there are all kinds of types of community engagement, and they really are on the spectrum. Government engages, at least our government engages in all of these types, and they have real implications in terms of like kind of community impact. So, kind of on the spectrum from sharing information, which is obviously critical, and providing services, to consulting with communities, to all the way over to shared decision making. I think the important thing here is really kind of, we're really talking about sharing power, which really changes this kind of one-way street of like, here's a bunch of information to like, let's come together and make this decision together. So not every decision can be made that way, and not every community engagement has that as its aim. But I do think it's an important thing to recognize as you're engaging communities, where on the spectrum do you fall, and what is your kind of desired outcome, and what can communities expect on the back end. Next slide, and I think this is the last one. So then we just did like kind of a summary of our first year of doing these things. So we in addition to kind of convening agencies and providing supports on individual engagement efforts, we also tried to pilot a bunch of different things. So we did a lot of like bringing people together across agencies, but also across sectors. We did one in order to kind of, if you remember that story about the blind people touching the elephant in different parts, and everyone, when they touch the elephant, think it's a different thing because no one can kind of quote unquote see the whole elephant. So we're really trying to kind of see the whole elephant in our kind of most complicated systems. One of those was making sure that folks who are returning to their neighborhoods after being incarcerated have access to housing. We've also done a bunch of great work around gun violence prevention and setting up neighborhood safety alliances so that community members are working together with the police department and with community-based organizations to really plan community safety together to make that kind of a collective endeavor, and a bunch of other stuff. So I could kind of talk all day. Really appreciate the time, and that's it for me.
Well, thank you so much, Betsy. That's really inspiring work from New York City. Great ideas in terms of community engagement, which is such a theme that runs through all of open government work. And so finally, last but certainly not least, I'm really excited to turn this over to our friends from Cherokee Nation and to Paula Starr to walk us through some of your experience. Over to you, Paula.
CEO, and good afternoon. My name is Paula Starr. I'm the Chief Information Officer at Cherokee Nation. And I feel when I speak in these spaces, I need to start off with a little bit of a level setting about Cherokee Nation and what we are, what we do. I know that sometimes there's a lack of familiarity with tribal governments, and we're not monolithic, but I'll tell you all about Cherokee Nation. So Cherokee Nation is this nation's largest federally recognized tribe. We have just over 470,000 citizens. Now, most of those citizens live on our reservation. That reservation covers about 7,000 square miles in the northeastern corner of the state of Oklahoma. But we do have citizens that live outside the reservation all across every country in the Union, every state in the Union, and then 23 countries beyond that. So our citizenry is very widespread. Within the reservation, we offer a number of services, and it's anything from housing to human and career services, as well as transportation and infrastructure and many other services in addition to that. We also operate educational institutions. So we have a high school that supports youth of 44 different tribes. And we have an immersion school where Cherokee youth can get their entirety of their lessons in the Cherokee language, which is something that we're fighting very hard to preserve. Out of 470,000 citizens, fewer than 2,000 citizens still speak the Cherokee language fluently. So we're in a real race against time to try to save that language. What often surprises people is that we also have a law enforcement agency that does have jurisdiction on our reservation. And that is called the Cherokee Nation Marshal Service. And we also have a court system. So we have our own district court and we have our own Cherokee Nation Supreme Court. For those citizens that live off reservation, we can't provide them quite the same number of services that we provide on reservation. So our relationship with those citizens is more of one of community and cultural outreach, and trying to maintain relationships with those citizens. So what I'll mostly be talking about today is efforts that we started 3 years ago. It's our first efforts to get into any kind of open government, and that is with our citizen access portal. So back in 2021, we implemented a portal that allowed us to deliver, to digitize services, to deliver assistance digitally, but also to help us build bridges to our communities that we typically did not have contact with. So we do a lot of in-person outreach. We will travel. I love that Amber's on here today because we're traveling to Little Rock this weekend. We'll be out there interfacing with Cherokee citizens in Little Rock. We'll go to Atlanta this summer. We go to many big cities to interface with our Cherokee citizens. But prior to 2021, we really didn't have a way to digitally connect and to try to build one great Cherokee community, no matter where you are. So we started building that, and it has really given us a tool to not only give out assistance, but also to collect feedback. And so we've been able to make communication, but we've also been able to do outreach and get input on how citizens would like to see funding spent. When we got our first COVID-19 assistance, we were able to survey, and we got 21,000 citizens getting back with us and letting us know what they prioritized and where they would like to see that funding go. So the name of this portal that we use is the Gadoogie portal, and Gadoogie is both a Cherokee word and it's a Cherokee community value. When you translate it to English, it means working together. And I think that really encapsulates what we're trying to do with our technology. We're really trying to find ways that we're working not just for citizens, but we're working with citizens. And that's a theme that I look forward to exploring further as we go throughout this session today.
So much, Paula. Really inspiring work happening in Cherokee Nation. And thanks again for being here today as part of this panel. So hopefully this has been as inspiring and exciting to all our participants and everyone who's on the call today as it has been for me. I feel like we took a trip around the country. We got to hear from a lot of great experiences at very local levels. And so I'd like to now move us into a moderated panel discussion where we can really take out the opportunity to hear from all of you as pioneers on this work and unpack some of the new directions you're taking at the local level and some successes. So the first question is one that I'd like to pose to everybody, which is really about how you went about identifying areas for open government approaches and where you determined they could really make a difference in delivering for your communities. So we'll have each of you just do a quick response on this and then move into our second question. But this is really just about how, amongst all the many, many priorities that you deal with every day, did you identify the ones that were most ripe for open government work? So Daniel, why don't we kick off with you, if that's okay?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And, in our first action plan, we were really figuring out, again, what it meant to create commitments on a local level. So we had this mix of, projects that were very important within our community. Homelessness has always been a focus in our community, and one that we've been trying to figure out how to, consistently engage with more effectively and creatively. Equity, especially in 2016, was starting to become more and more of I'll say official focus within organizations, and understanding how we could bring that into the city organization was important, and then laying this infrastructure for what do we need for open government partnership and projects, to continue doing this year over year. So that's that's how we went about creating our first set of commitments, and then we learned from that it was a big lift for one single office, the innovation office, to be the lead or the lead collaborator on effectively all of these, and we wanted to have a more collaborative and frankly more focus across the city organization and civil society than just us participating in OGP now that it was introduced. So in our second action plan, we really tried to identify projects and initiatives and focus areas that people were already had intentions in doing or starts of doing, but that would really benefit from the OGP framework, the OGP resources, the connections to civil society, and the broader global community that we can make, and really saw it as a support mechanism and an elevation mechanism. And so we found, those partners across the organization, across the city, and that was great. I feel like that work was much more smooth, and much more impactful. And that's how we're going about our third action plan as well, finding those coalitions of folks that are already working in this direction and just giving them even more resources and more wind in their sails.
Great, thanks so much. And I know you've benefited so much from sort of the infrastructure that exists in civil society and your community, and obviously being able to use the National Action Plan process to sort of hone in, prioritize commitments, and co-create them. So thanks very much for that. I guess in contrast, I'd love to turn this over to Amber, because Amber, you guys are not part of OGP local. So how did you go about, you went through quite a number of priority areas, some really cutting edge areas. How did you hone in on those as being the ones you wanted to pursue?
Yeah, so as a leader, I like to ask a lot of questions, not only of ourselves as public servants, but also of our residents and our private and nonprofit partners as well. I'll actually give an example on this one. I mentioned the minority business enterprise map that we developed, and that came out of our efforts with an initiative called Opportunity Little Rock. A big focus of our administration has been diversifying our supplier base here at the city. And so we've invited our public and private partners, large-scale organizations, anchor institutions to join us in these efforts. And when we first began convening that group of CEOs and executives, one of the things that they said as we were talking about supplier diversity is, well, we don't know where these minority businesses are. We don't know who they are or how to get in touch with them. And so the idea was born out of that. And of course, we did a lot of exploring with our partners on where should this map live. And it just turned out that we had the tools and the space to host it here at the city.
Great, thanks. Listening to a real demand signal there and seeing where the problem is, that's a really great example. Paula, I wonder if you might come in and share a little bit about how you all are thinking about these priorities and what's right for open government.
Yeah, so we don't pursue open government. We don't pursue OGP as a program, right? But what we have found in practice is that so many of the initiatives that come out of Chief Hoskins' administration have some element of open gov baked into them. And so it's incumbent upon me as a CIO in the IT department that I lead to make sure that we have flexible technologies in place, so that we are ready to support whatever initiatives come our way and that we're able to be open. I think one great example of this is Chief Hoskin recently signed an executive order on climate change. And it had a lot of the things that you typically would expect to have in there, like we're banning the procurement of single-use plastics across Cherokee Nation government, those kind of practical measures. But there was also a measure in there to create a youth task force with the intent of getting those who are going to be most impacted by some of the unwise decisions that we made around our environment, to let them lead an initiative that would also reach out to citizens across the reservation and beyond and get their feedback. So that task force has been asked to get feedback, build coalitions of other youth, and start making real change across the reservation, start taking real action. We would not be able to do that if we did not have a portal in place that allowed us to get that feedback and to authenticate citizenry. Because in the past, what has always blocked us from being able to communicate bidirectionally with citizens is just that tricky way of authenticating whether someone's a citizen, right? Like because we have citizens everywhere. We have them on the reservation, we have them off. But once we were able to solve that issue within our portal, it opened up everything for us to be able to start getting that feedback anytime our chief has the desire to do so.
Thanks so much. And thanks especially for really, elevating the issue of technology. Now, obviously, I'm sitting in the Office of Science Technology Policy, and within the OGP context, technology has always been seen as a critical tool for openness, for transparency, and ultimately for community engagement and participation. So it is essential that those two worlds come together, the world of sort of openness and the world around tools and technology, because that is sort of the way that we can best reach citizens, communities, marginalized groups around the world, and certainly in our own communities. So Betsy, I wonder if you might explain a little bit, you have a lot on those slides around different levels of engagement. How did you go about identifying those as your approaches?
Yeah, well, like we did urban planner, we did kind of a landscape scan as we started off and really thought about both kind of population specific and place specific approaches. And then with a layer on top of this big survey that we did, this policy priority survey that we did, that adult New Yorkers and also some 18,000 New York City public school students responded to. So we had a bunch of data there, both in kind of stuff that's been done, what infrastructure exists, and then what people want. And then on top of that, we have kind of mayoral priorities as kind of a new administration coming in 2021. So we tried to kind of put that all, kind of layer all of those things on top of each other. And then with a real eye toward equity, especially kind of coming out of the pandemic, really thinking deeply about and focusing on those communities that were hardest hit by COVID, particularly Black and Brown communities, low income communities, public housing residents. So really thinking about those kinds of New Yorkers, the New Yorkers who really kind of struggled the most during COVID, and were having, we were seeing in the data having the hardest time kind of bouncing back afterwards. So we took all of those layers and kind of did a scan to really start to identify where there were gaps and where there are opportunities to be able to super lean in.
Great, thank you. And that's a really nice one to end on, because the issue of data and the use of data and the fidelity of that data is such an important piece for open government work. And bringing it back to the equity argument, which Daniel, I know you made at the beginning too, in terms of looking for those opportunities and how openness, how data, open data, and the use of that can be used to promote equity and inclusion, especially with more marginalized communities. Well, great. That was a great first round question. So now I want to come back to all of you and talk about where you think that these kinds of approaches on open government, transparency, accountability, community engagement, where they have made the biggest difference. So Amber, this time I think I'll start with you. Where are you seeing that this is making the biggest difference in Little Rock?
Yeah, so we've spoken about it a lot today, and that is in civic engagement. Our mayor is a full-time mayor, which is a change from the previous administration. And we our boots on equity and accessible information, we're all about it. So just love seeing civic engagement increasing in our community. And I love the question that I saw earlier in the chat about how we're measuring that. I think that's something that we're still working out as a city. Our office is relatively new. We were established in we've been around for about 3 years now. So and we do have that baseline, and I think that's our next step to follow up and see how civic engagement is increasing.
Excellent. Well, I would love to hear more about those baselines too. Sometimes some of this work on democracy, participatory democracy, is so hard to measure. So getting great indicators and data sets is important for all of us. Betsy, why don't I turn this to you next? Where are you seeing that this is having a big impact?
Well, I mean, I'll say a couple of different things. I think there are, again, various levels to this. I think with a kind of a concentrated effort to engage New Yorkers, which I will say New York City has a long history of doing, so it's not necessarily new. But I think what we're trying to do is really raise the bar, both in terms of quantity and quality. We have like a remarkable participatory budgeting kind of process that's been brilliant. And over the last 2 years, that's expanded beyond. It used to sit with the city council, and now it's within government and focused in each of our 5 boroughs. And so community members have been super engaged in that process, which is, you know, a really kind of direct impact on how government is spending money. So that's been super exciting. I will say just kind of overall, I think there is a general acknowledgement that you kind of can't do anything before you talk to New Yorkers, at least anything big, kind of whether that's a transportation project, a rezoning, or other kind of big endeavor that impacts people's lives, which is almost everything that we do. So that I think is a general acknowledgement. I think we still have a ways to go in terms of making sure that we both value community engagement, so that we then put the resources that are required. And that those resources are not just kind of money and staff, but also just time. So I think there's some really exciting kind of developments. I think in our public housing authority, public housing residents now have a direct vote on whether their developments that enter into you know, the kind of the RAD PACT program, which is a big program to kind of refinance and redevelop public housing units, which is, you know, kind of, it was a dream that we had some years ago. We went to London, that's what they were doing. We thought it was so awesome. There's a big report, and now we're doing it. So that feels super exciting. And again, kind of direct impact on the kinds of programs and services and systems that really shape all of our lives. And so I think that like that overall vibe is out there. I think, again, I think we still have quite a ways to go.
Great, thanks. Those are some really great examples, and reminds me too that the fact that the other side of community engagement, civic engagement, is really having that engagement be informed, right? And so I think I love that idea of really putting resources into that community engagement. Paula, where are you seeing successes in terms of, you know, some of these general approaches on participation and inclusion?
I think we've done a really great job in creating engagement across our communities and engaging communities to help other communities. So as I was growing up, you know, what I felt like it meant to be Cherokee was to help others out in your community. If someone was in need, you know, someone would have a great big chili supper at their house and invite people in and take donations and then give that to whoever was in need. And I feel like we're recreating that on a larger scale. So we're seeing this huge potential in connecting communities that are more resourced to help communities that are lesser resourced. One great example of this is our Angel Project. So every year between Thanksgiving and Christmas, we have an Angel Project, and it's much like the angel tree that you're probably familiar with. And in the past, we would physically put this tree up in the tribal complex lobby. And on it would have names of children who were in need and their Christmas wish lists. But this past year, we decided to digitize that and to open it up to citizens who are off reservation to participate and to help out if they wished. And the desire to help was overwhelming. So we went from, you know, what would normally take us a year to amass in donations, we amassed in a couple of weeks. So again, it's just that ability to bring people together, to connect them to need. We're also working on a project called Gadoogie Corps, which is much like AmeriCorps or Peace Corps. And it is, again, bringing people in to volunteer who have resources to help other communities who don't have the resources. So for us, that's so much of what's at the heart of our efforts to drive engagement.
Thanks. I love that. Using OpenGov to really drive engagement investment, right, in your community. That's really exciting. Well, that teed me up perfectly for the next thing, because what I wanted to say was that one of our hopes here is that we're starting to really create a sense of the kinds of experiences that are happening across the country. And we have a great smattering of experiences here, but there are many more. And part of that is about learning from each other. So I wanted to flip the script. Usually in these kinds of panels, there's one person asking the questions and everyone else is answering. I'd like to give you an opportunity to each ask a question of another panelist in terms of some sharing. And so, Daniel, why don't I start with you? Who would you like to ask a question to from this esteemed group of colleagues from across the country?
Oh yeah, my opportunity to put somebody on the spot. I'll be nice and say that anyone can jump in here. But maybe some of the newer efforts like New York City or someone like that can tell me, where your latest thinking is. We always talk about, the need to evaluate and measure, and I think also important to feedback and adapt based on what we learn. We often have, of course, project specific or initiative specific outcomes and measures that we look at, but I haven't seen a more kind of meta level on assessing outcomes around some of these bigger open government themes over time. So like transparency or accountability. We can say the specifics of each project that happened, but does anyone have a way to assess that on the broader scale, say on an administration level scale or an organization level scale? Maybe less of a numerical score, more of like a trend or a trajectory. But I'd love to hear if anyone has some of those kind of big meta measures and a way to tell those stories on a higher level.
Well, Daniel, I have an idea that came to mind as you were talking. One way that I think if we were to begin measuring, particularly when it comes to transparency and access to information, I would love to see a decrease in the number of FOIA, Freedom of Information Act requests that we receive. That would be a good measure that we're already putting the information out there that people are wanting access to.
It's an interesting idea. I like that.
Great. Well, Amber, would you like, since you very bravely came up with an answer, would you like to ask the next question to a panelist?
Yeah, so I have a question, and I'll be nice like Daniel and say this is open to anyone as well. But one thing that's been kind of bouncing around in my mind is we've spoken a lot about civic engagement and efforts to engage the community, but particularly when we're working with marginalized individuals, individuals who are experiencing low income, they have a lot on their plates. And so my question is how do we know when engagement gets to be too much? Have any of you experienced survey fatigue among your residents, and kind of how do you address that? How do you manage that?
I guess I'll jump in here. Yes, I mean, I think folks all the time feel like you're coming to us again with these questions. I think the big antidote there is to act on what people have told you, to make sure that there is some kind of feedback loop so that folks feel folks are heard, know that they're heard, see themselves in whatever the outcome of the process is. And if you're not able to deliver on what folks want, being transparent about that this is why we couldn't hear the constraints that we dealt with. So I think that's number one. I think the other that just happens all the time is if you just do a survey and walk away. I mean, I think that it's dangerous to engage folks and not have some kind of follow-up. And even if that follow-up is like, actually everything has changed, the money is gone, we can't do anything right now, we heard you, as soon as we possibly can, we're going to return to that. So that's I mean, I think just like straight, like what you would do in a relationship, like is what we consider to be kind of best practice when it comes to both engagement fatigue and just overall kind of inclusive, meaningful, accessible engagement.
But if I could add just a few things real quick too here in Austin, I think that all that's super important. We are trying to do more coordination internally to understand, especially on like surveys, are we all asking the same thing, 20 different ways? And can we be more effective in combining our efforts internally, even just how we're planning them? Second is we pay people and we try and do wraparound services. So we're trying to make it a standard practice, even for surveys. Time is compensated, and especially for more extended engagements or more intensive engagements, that we have a standard way to compensate residents and offer childcare, transit, wraparound services, whatever folks may need. And then we're trying to also do different types of engagements. So, not always surveys, but, 2 of our OGP projects, one was creating a advisory panel of people experiencing homelessness that have, direct power in selecting service contracts for our community court, which is kind of an alternative court. So and that's an extended long-term engagement for them. So it's not just getting their feedback and then doing what we want with it. Like, they actually have that ability to influence and make those selections in the contracts. And similar with our anti-displacement efforts, we had a group of residents who were actively experiencing displacement pressure make a portion of budget allocations for several $100 million of anti-displacement money. So trying to be, we don't do that every time, and there's always, it's always contentious and tricky when you start to do real power sharing like that. But trying to show that possibility and make those engagements as intentional as possible in whatever form they take, because we do often try and just default to the survey, even if that's not the best way to actually engage around that topic.
Great, good question and very good conversation. So Betsy, since you took the first lead, want to take the next question, and then we'll give Paula a chance to ask a question as well.
Sure. Yeah, Paula, I had a question for you. I really liked when you were talking about the chili dinner model. I think that's something that we think about all the time. There's lots of kind of more formal infrastructure for kind of civic engagement and community participation. But in some ways, the kind of more informal, where government doesn't have, whether it's like mutual aid societies or other, like, that's some of the most powerful stuff. And so I think we've been thinking a lot about both, like, how do we kind of facilitate that without getting in the way? And I know you gave a couple of really good examples of the Angel Project, and but I'm just curious, like, that feels to me like that's what we've been kind of missing out on. We kind of go at this stuff with, these like formal town halls or public hearings or surveys, when what really is what's meaningful to folks is that time to break bread, to share community, to really be kind of in community together. So I'm curious, like, it's kind of a question.
Yeah, for us, I do feel like for other governments, there's all these structures around that are in place before you proceed. For us, here's the thing, and I'll touch on this later again. We don't have a lot of data, right, around where our need is, because we don't have the same mechanisms for collecting data that other governments do. When there's a federal census, they're not asking someone if they're Cherokee or not, right? So we just don't have that same kind of data that other people have. And for us, it always has to be more of a gut feel kind of thing. And I hate to say that because it's going to diminish what we do. But it's more of, we know we have these needs in our communities because we live in them. And so now it's, what can we dream up to build around to help those communities? And we also get a lot of great outreach from citizens who want to help, citizens who are external and say, hey, if you would just do this, if you would just put this out there, I would participate and I would help. And so we do it. So there's a lot of informal feedback mechanisms that come into play for us to build what we build out. And it's always very successful. But again, it's all about having those means to communicate, right, and being able to make that outreach to our citizens and put the call out.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Great. So it's over to you, Paula. One final question. Ask it to anyone or multiple people.
Yeah. So, I love the talk around involving the marginalized populations and getting them involved. And I wonder if that is something that you all measure as you're making these efforts, measuring the participation of those marginalized communities, and if there are action plans thereafter to try to bring more voices in if they're disproportionate.
I'll take a shot at that one. We obviously, as the Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, our work is both internal here at the city and external. Externally, what I have found in these past couple of years is we can get the marginalized communities to come to the table all day long. And when I think of our city, we, like many cities across the country, have an interstate that was built straight through the middle of it in the 1950s, and it has created a divide. You can look just north of that interstate and just south, and the property values are starkly, vastly different. And so anytime I'm thinking of our city, I'm thinking of it in terms of north of 630 and south of 630. And really my challenge has been getting the folks north to come to the table to do some of that, like you were talking about, communities learning from one another. Because I think they have a lot to teach each other and a lot of good work that they could do together. I don't yet have an answer for it, but it's just this fundamental question of how do you engage in community with people whose idea of community may be different than yours.
I love that answer. Thank you.
Great, thank you. I thought that was a great way to end that round of questions, and thanks for indulging this format. I hope you found that kind of useful and fun to be able to talk amongst panelists and ask questions that you might not otherwise get to. Again, perhaps the not so hidden agenda here as well is to connect some of you and connect some of these efforts with the hope, to your point, Paula, that you mentioned really at the outset about communities learning from each other and helping each other out, right? Each one of you is coming from a different scenario, different resources for sure, different size for sure, and a host of other challenges that are distinct. And yet there are themes that have come out across these spaces that are shared. And so I hope you found that useful. And it certainly was very interesting for us. So I'm going to now move us in just a final question, sort of a final round robin question, which is really what's the next step? What's the next frontier? Where do you see the new opportunities to either scale the work you're doing or forge a new path ahead? So Paula, why don't we start with you, and then we'll move to the rest of the panel.
Okay. Yeah, so obviously generative AI has this potential to really help navigate services. That is where we would really like to focus and apply some efforts. It's just, one of the things that I get, burial service is one of the services that we provide, and people often don't know, well, you go to human services to get to burial services. And what happens is people ask through their communities, hey, how do you get this? Or they'll go to their tribal counselor, which is part of our legislative arm, and start going through that mode when it's just, it's already a stressful time if you're asking for that kind of service, right? So we need to help our citizens navigate services more easily. And in the tribal space, really, I think gaining a better understanding of our citizen populations is key in understanding their needs. So much of the data that tribes collect today is done in service of fulfilling federal requirements, or it's data about our most vulnerable populations. I don't think that any of us really have a comprehensive understanding of the totality of our populations, from one spectrum to the other. And we rely on data that's collected externally so many times to get a better understanding of our own people. So for us, we know data is a key driver to insights. We know it's a key driver to the use of the good use cases of AI. And so at Cherokee Nation, we're really focused on working to ensure that we have the data we need to understand our citizens and to go beyond just fulfilling today's needs and trying to anticipate tomorrow's needs. And again, I think that's really the next frontier for us as a tribe and probably for many other tribes out there too.
So sorry, I'm having a little bit of technical trouble right here. Thank you so much, Paula. I really appreciate that. So any final thoughts on this particular question from the rest of you? Betsy, would you like to go next on where you feel the next frontier might be?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I really agree with Paula. I think while we have access, it sounds like, to a ton more data about New Yorkers, I feel like we only have part of the story. So really, like, knowing, kind of filling out that data picture of our neighbors, of New Yorkers, I think is something that's super important for us to be able to really govern in a way that's both effective, but that's also in this kind of power sharing partnership. It will lead guaranteed to kind of better outcomes, and then we'll also have these kind of ancillary impacts on well-being, on resilience, on belonging. I think that idea of in New York, where again, I think people feel super duper connected to their neighborhoods, feel much less connected as you kind of move out from neighborhood to borough, to larger city. And so really thinking about what's the New Yorker's experience that goes way beyond all of the many kind of metrics that we have. We have a mayor's management report that comes out once a year that's about 700 pages long that no normal person would read. And it gives us a lot of insight into kind of performance of agencies, but almost no insight into kind of how government lands with New Yorkers. So I think that part, and like really learning how to systematize that, to institutionalize that, I think is super critical. And then I think the other component is really thinking about what are those ways that kind of open government, whether that's kind of data and transparency or like broader questions of civic trust, can really lead to this feeling of agency, that I have some power over the systems that shape my life. So really thinking deeply about what are all the levers that we have as government, including like getting out of the way lever, to ensure that folks, that's something that we all, again, to like Senator Warnock's points, that's like kind of our destiny, like our being able to shape our destiny is a critical piece, and how do we make sure that we're enabling that for folks.
Thanks so much. That's a great answer, and that's a great sort of partner response to what Paul was talking about in terms of some of the opportunities that exist with AI, and then some of just the real life lived experience of users of our systems and users of government services. Amber, would you like to share your thoughts for the future?
Yeah, so as expected, I too, when we think about the frontier of open government, focused primarily on AI and how we can harness it to be a partner in getting our work done more efficiently, more effectively, better service to our residents, while also being careful not to allow instances for AI to become a part of decision-making processes, because obviously there are equity concerns within AI as we're replicating the biases that exist within humanity. The other piece there, I would say, I see as a major opportunity for our city is some more of this, as Daniel put it earlier, power sharing, participatory budgeting. I know is something that some of our residents are interested in, and I am comfortable being an advocate for that, even if it's baby steps that we take to get there. It's okay when change happens slowly, but I would personally love to really see some more of that.
Great, thanks. Thanks so much for bringing that up. And in a moment, I'll reference some thoughts that we're having at the OGP level, at the global level, about some of these exact issues. But would love to hear from Daniel about where he sees the next frontier.
Yeah, thanks. In addition to what everyone said, some of the things that we're trying to focus on specifically in our OGP program and Next Action Plan is bringing some more anticipatory and strategic foresight tools. So instead of starting with like, oh, what do we need to fix, looking ahead and see where some of the things on the horizon, how can we collaboratively work on identifying those things and turning them into opportunities for our community. Rather than things that we need to go back and correct or make better. So looking forward to putting some of those, again, more future-looking tools and approaches into things like environmental investment plans, potentially comprehensive plan updates, helping people with, how we understand our supply chain and resilience and across the city, and taking that forward-looking approach.
Thanks so much, Daniel. Well, I always love hearing and ending panel discussions on sort of the future and the next steps and forward looking. And you've all brought up some very good points. I did want to reference that these are actually quite similar to the themes we are hearing in the Global Open Government Partnership. The Open Government Partnership issued an OpenGov challenge in September of last year on 10 key themes where they see opportunities for deeper commitment, for more ambitious commitments, and for more ambitious engagement. Now, that's part of the partnership, but whether you're part of the partnership or not, this is sort of part of the OpenGov movement around the world and the kind of work that governments are doing at all levels in countries all over the world. In particular, on the AI thing, there's real opportunities. There are risks, of course, there are real opportunities. And one of the things that I wanted to point out to all of you is that the Open Government Partnership recently published a publication on the use of AI for open government, for greater transparency, accountability, and community engagement that may be of interest to you and to our participants today. So thanks so much for that great panel. We have received quite a number of questions, and to facilitate that and get those questions to the right individuals, I'm going to pass this back to Dan York from the U.S. Open Government Secretariat to lead us briefly through Q&A before we move to our federal panel. Over to you, Dan.
No, thank you. We have way more questions that we can get to in the roughly 10, 15 minutes remaining in this session, or at least this part of the session. So I'm going to be doing my best to try to combine some questions into a coherent one here. But one of the things that came up through the Q&A boxes was specific examples around where you gather data and then you use that data to inform policy, and then you measure that policy that helps you gather better data. So do you have any examples of sort of that policy data life cycle where you have input from the public at various stages? What should we do? Did we do what you wanted? Did we do what you wanted work? And then sort of back to the beginning again. Is there any comment on that from our panelists? Hard pass. Okay. No. Anyone want to give it a go? Nothing. All right. Moving along. There was a couple of other questions around AI. There's a lot of questions about how we use AI to inform what we do either now or in the future. We talked on that briefly already, but I know specifically our friend from Arkansas, Little Rock, was saying how you use AI within the current tool sets. Do you want to expand a bit on that, and not only like the actual practicality of using it?
Sure. Outside of, using ChatGPT to summarize things for you, it has been helpful. Our HR team has used it to develop interview questions from job descriptions. That's one practical application. It can be very helpful with our grants team. Use it for, when there's a large RFP that comes out, they can summarize that and very quickly start drafting a response to it. We have a lot of interest. I actually know from a recent survey, an engagement survey that we did internally from our employees and learning more about it. So we've got actually coming up, we're going to do a professional development series with with our IT department and our chief data officer, who recently went to a conference on AI to see what other kinds of technologies. It has been extremely helpful. We're very excited about the language access and how much that can open up our government to a large portion of our population. And so just look forward to continuing to find ways that we can make good use of it.
I just wanted to jump in and add, for us, you know, so many of our services overlap with state services or even with federal services. That there's multiple layers of overlap. And for us to be able to use generative AI to navigate all of those things and figure out where a citizen may be eligible for multiple programs, where we may be able to, you know, maybe we don't have the resources for that particular citizen, but we can help them find state or federal resources by feeding in those, you know, the content from those websites to try to find to help is one place that we're keying in on.
That actually brings up another good question, is that how you wind up reaching those most vulnerable, right? Those vulnerable populations that may not be filling out surveys, may not show up when you put out, in our case, Federal Register notices. Like, how do you really understand how best to help those vulnerable populations, beyond just identifying they exist? Can the panel perhaps talk a little bit about what you do to identify and give help to those that need it the most?
We actually, oh, sorry.
No, please go ahead, Paula.
We do a lot of outreach directly into communities. We have a lot of communities that are very remote, very rural. And so we do make efforts to have meetings, community meetings out there and to try to meet people. You know, we'll provide some food and some giveaways and things like that, but we'll also bring our departments with us when we go out to those communities so that we have representation from all these departments to talk with our communities. When we started moving into the portal and we knew it was very digital, we knew there were some people who just would not be able to access it. So we've had drive-throughs as well, just to allow citizens to come through and do a drive-through it and submit requests or have discussions with us.
Yeah, we do a lot of partnering with community-based organizations. So kind of using the trusted messenger model. So we partner with groups that have worked in their communities, you know, forever and a day, where folks trust them, know that they can go to them for good advice and for good services. And then we listen to them when we're working with them, if they have, you know, kind of feedback on format, content, whatever the thing is that we're doing together, to really listen to them. I think some of the best work that we've done over the last few years is really is again kind of as much as possible, and kind of a friend from the new school just recently kind of termed this like trust-based governance, and it is kind of trust-based philanthropy, but really kind of giving community-based organizations funds without a million restrictions and reporting requirements, and trusting that they know best what to do with that money. So we did that around benefits access with like a series of 39 community-based organizations in different communities in different parts of the city, and really kind of left it to them to tell us like, here's how we're going to use the money, and then to report in on how that went. I think if we do more of that, we will reach the folks that we really both want and need to reach the most. And then to Paula's point, we really try to kind of meet folks where they are, make sure we're scheduling meetings within communities, make it easy to get there, provide childcare, food, when possible, money. I think Daniel's point is a good one. Making sure that we're valuing people's time, I think is super critical. And then of course, like just kind of basic, I mean, this is like community organizing 101, right? But making sure that we're providing translation and interpretation. We often are in communities that have multiple languages. So making sure that we're doing that, and really just being super intentional about including the folks, like what it will take to include the folks who have the greatest barriers to participation.
Great. There's a lot of good work there. I heard a lot about trusted networks and networks of networks. I always say if me and the federal government shows up with my suit and says how I'm here to help, most of the time people just run away. So there's a lot of great input there. We had an interesting question. I actually think it's a little forward looking, but love to hear more about how and when the success stories of local government efforts are connecting with the state and federal level. Obviously, this is a first attempt at that, but if folks can maybe perhaps about how those efforts have been successful in the past, or how you'd want those efforts to be successful in the future, how we could help each other continue to grow in our open governmentness. I might say the first step is having an open government secretariat. That tip. Sorry. Shameless.
So I'll just say, one of the biggest lessons that I've learned in participating in collaboratives like this is it's easier to see yourself reflected in others. And in city government, we're often building the plane as we're flying it. I'm not sure if it's the same for y'all at the federal level, but one thing we do not have time to do is to sit down and write white papers. But we do have promising practices that are worth sharing. And what I would love to see are more partnerships with educational institutions that could really help us make the time to sit down and, at least run through with them what we're doing, and then they could help to document it.
Anyone else have some thoughts on how we can better work together at the local, state, federal, tribal levels? I got those out of order, but I think you were catching on. Great. This is just so many questions. I know the city of New York, relatively new to the open OGP local program. So first, congratulations on that. What did you think of the process? Was it difficult? Was it easy? Who did you partner with? How can you talk a little bit about how that went?
Sure. We were inspired by our colleagues at People Powered. Shout out to Josh Lerner. Inspired, nudged, pushed to apply. So we did that, and it felt like a good, a good first step on this journey. I will say that, we're super brand new to this. It's like a couple of months old, and the Office of Engagement is only a couple of years old. And so I think there's a lot of work to be done to kind of socialize the idea across the administration, which is big. I think, again, there's like some really beautiful kind of handholds on kind of open governance in our Civic Engagement Commission in particular, and lots of other places. So I think we have a bunch of work to do. I think the process was fairly straightforward. I think what we'd like to do moving forward is do a lot more partnering and really figuring out kind of what our plan is. And both our plan, our goals, and our vision, like kind of our big picture vision for what we want New York to look like in a kind of an open government context. And recognizing that lots of people have been doing this work for a long time, and so building on that work.
Great, thank you. So I know we're actually a little over our set time for this, but perhaps one more question is what did the speakers learn from the open government work right outside of the US? And what would you like to learn? Where there are opportunities to continue? Sort of a prep for our federal panel coming up next.
Well, I would just like to say, I learned from Amber today, and I know this is more local, but that whole concept of Opportunity Arkansas, and trying to help people find resources to minority businesses. Just sitting in here and having that conversation today, I'm like, oh my gosh, light bulbs went off, because we do the same. We have a very simple mechanism internally to connect procurement with Cherokee vendors, but I had never stopped to think about connecting the outside world, our citizens, to those same vendors. So I think just sitting in this conversation today, like, I've got something very actionable to go back and do.
Great. All right, Jen, I guess I'll pass it back to you.
Well, thanks so much. Thanks, first of all, to our participants for all those great questions. I know there are a ton more. Thanks to our panelists for doing inline responses. I'm sure, without speaking for them, that maybe they'd be happy to talk about it offline at some point. And I really would like to also thank you, Paula, for leaving us on that really great note. Just to note that there is tons of learning to happen from the global piece, from the national piece, from all of our governments across the country. And so this has been a great panel. Thank you so much for sharing your experiences. Congratulations on all your successes to date. And I'm now going to shift us into a conversation about what open government looks like at the federal level. And so we're going to have an opportunity to learn from 3 colleagues from across our federal government who are really at the leading edge of this work. And none best to kick us off but Shaibia, who has been leading in actually very connected to one of the questions that came in, our process on advancing public participation and community engagement at the federal level. So over to you, Shaibia.
Thank you so much, Jen. And hi, everyone. As Jen mentioned, my name is Shaibia Dalal. I am the federal lead for equity and engagement at the White House Office of Management and Budget, or OMB. And I'm thrilled to be here to tell you all about OMB's latest effort to advance the public engagement and open government agenda. So next slide. Let me just start by what OMB is doing. So we are developing a government-wide framework, the first federal framework, as far as we know, for public participation and community engagement activities. And we've been shortening public participation and community engagement as PPCE. I also know that we have a lot of jargon and acronyms in government world, so very open to ideas on, if we might consider different acronyms or different ways of framing this too. But the whole reason for creating this framework is to really enable agencies to more effectively, more broadly, and more meaningfully involve public in the work of government. And when I talk about PPCE activities, I mean things like notice and comment processes, requests for information, listening sessions, user research, really any activity that's carried out by a federal agency to consult with the public in order to inform regulations, policies, and other actions that that agency takes. And so in developing this framework, we're trying to model leading practices for engagement ourselves, which has meant involving the public as well as agencies on the front end of the process and providing multiple mechanisms for folks to submit feedback. And I'll tell you more in just a few slides how we've been doing that. So next slide. Just a little bit more about why we're doing this. So PPCE is encouraged and required in a wide range of statutes, executive actions, and policy directives that span administrations. So this is not a new topic. Agencies take a variety of actions today to connect with those who are directly affected by the government's decisions. The problem is that we often do these without using what might be considered the best possible array of proven tools or methods to reach those who are most impacted by the decisions and then generate the kind of feedback that would be most helpful to agencies. So for something that the government does a lot, we actually lack a government-wide terminology, framework, and understanding of the most effective tools for participation and engagement activities. So agencies can find it challenging to actually think through and understand what forms of outreach or engagement make sense for specific activities and goals to reach different audiences. And there's a lot of information that people have about their own lived experiences, their communities, that's really critical for agencies to have, but without robust PPCE, and especially earlier and more consistent PPCE, agencies might not get that information. And this is why, even though agencies will conduct participation and engagement activities, we find that they don't always reach the people who they intended to, especially underserved communities, and they don't always prioritize the kind of outreach that would get them the outcomes that they're seeking. So next slide. So what will this framework do? First, it says good policy. I don't think I need to tell this room that meaningful and equitable PPCE can really help agencies to better understand the problems that they can address and develop solutions that are responsive to the public's concerns. We also know from research in the field how improved public participation and transparency are closely related to improved trust in government, which we also know is at an all-time low. Overall, this work holds a lot of potential to improve how government designs and delivers policies and programs in terms of who we reach, when and how we involve them, the lived experiences and perspectives that we use to inform decision making, and then how we build on the successes that agencies have already experienced, as well as model new efforts. So next slide. So as I mentioned, we started by going out to the public once we decided to create this kind of framework instead of developing it on our own and then just sharing the final product with everyone. And we asked for feedback in 3 buckets. So the first was around the experiences that individuals and organizations, especially those from underserved communities, have had in engaging with federal PPCE activities. What's worked well, what the barriers are, how we might make it easier for folks to engage with government. The second bucket requested feedback on content to incorporate in this kind of framework. So things like tools, metrics, leading practices, other frameworks that we should consider as models. And then the third bucket was about the process itself, knowing that we want to make this a collaborative process. What steps should we take to involve the public in co-developing this framework? When do folks want to hear from us? How and when they want to work with us? And how we can continue to engage the public as we build out this framework in the coming months. Next slide. So how did the public provide feedback? We invited comment over a 60-day period that ended just 2 weeks ago. And we gave folks a couple different ways to respond. All of this information is available at performance.gov/participation. And the first, we released a request for information, which is our general and formal way of notice and comment. So that way people submitted comments through regulations.gov. All those comments are also publicly available right now if you'd like to go take a look. Alternatively, and this was a new method, we allowed folks to submit feedback through a simple form online that asked the same questions as the RFI. So people could either use the RFI in regulations.gov or they could complete this simple online form. And this was one way that we were attempting to improve accessibility in the comment process. And we're also working to make all of those comments that came in through the form publicly available. The third way, we had both public and targeted listening sessions, so folks could come and learn more about this effort, as well as provide verbal feedback in lieu of or in addition to something they'd submitted through the written process. I know many of the folks in this room joined multiple listening sessions and provided written feedback, so thank you very much, and please know how much we appreciate that. At the same time, we also invited written feedback from federal as well as SLTT agencies and held listening sessions for them as well. Next slide. Just very quickly, wanted to highlight something else that we're also doing in the PPCE space. We launched a public challenge with our friends at GSA to really seek a toolkit that could help agencies assess how effective their methods are in terms of reaching people, improving inclusion, and fostering trust in decision-making. And this is really because we recognize how important it is to help agencies also evaluate whether these approaches are working while we help them create more meaningful and more equitable approaches to PPCE. And the first phase of this challenge just ended last week, and we're in the process of judging right now, and we'll be launching the second challenge, the second phase of the challenge in a couple weeks. So next slide, which is my last one. In terms of next steps, what's happening now? So we're in the process of conducting a methodical review and analysis of the written and verbal feedback that we've received to date from both the public and the agencies. We'll report out to everyone, public and agencies, on the feedback that we received, as well as our process for reviewing and categorizing it. We'll also develop and share a user-friendly reference tool to help the public sort and navigate through all the comments and the content that we received, so you're not having to go to regulations.gov and individually look at every single comment. It's not a helpful process for anyone to filter through. And so based on the feedback that we are getting from all of you, we'll create the draft framework for PPCE and then put that out for comment. So folks can see how their input has informed the framework, what feedback we didn't end up using, and then also give people a chance to provide further comment on that draft framework in order to help us refine it. So stay tuned. There's a lot more to come on this process. But for now, thank you for the time. And I'll turn it over to my colleague, Bobby Talebian from the Department of Justice next.
Thank you. And good afternoon, everyone. My name is Bobby Talebian. I am the Director of the Office of Information Policy at the Department of Justice. And I'm very pleased and excited to be here today to discuss the efforts of the government efforts in FOIA at the federal level. Next slide. Of course, FOIA is fundamental to open government and our democracy. And so it's something that is very connected to the theme today, of course. And next slide. And FOIA pushes open government and fosters open government, promotes open government by requiring certain key information to be proactively disclosed on agency's website and allowing anyone to submit a FOIA request and ask for access to agency records, any agency records, with the presumption that that information would be disclosed unless 9 narrow categories of exemptions apply, and there is a foreseeable harm in disclosure. Next slide. So as you can see, over the years, we have currently 121 agencies that are subject to the FOIA. And over the years, we've had a very healthy trend in increasing numbers of incoming requests. And this past year, actually, this past fiscal year, we hit a new historical milestone for FOIA, receiving and processing more than 1 million requests for the first time. So of course, this is really, to me, is really great because it means, it shows that the value of FOIA, that it's how it's being used by the public and citizens to access information that helps them keep government accountable, but also encourages and provides the information they need to be able to meaningfully engage with government. But of course, with the increasing volume of requests, there's challenges that agencies are continuing to work to overcome. And that is one of the core purposes of the work that we do at OIP. Next slide. So the Department of Justice, through the Office of Information Policy, is responsible for encouraging agency compliance with the FOIA and overseeing agency FOIA administration. And we do this through a number of different ways. First, we provide training, guidance, and legal advice to agencies on FOIA matters to make sure agencies, like I said, there's 118 agencies, over 6,000 FOIA professionals out there that are making sure FOIA is implemented effectively, efficiently, and correctly. And so fundamental to being able to achieve FOIA's mission is making sure that everyone has a proper understanding of how the law should be implemented. We also oversee compliance by making sure agencies, by managing agencies' reporting requirements that are important public reports that shed light on the administration of each agency's FOIA. And by maintaining FOIA.gov, which is the federal government's comprehensive website that includes a wealth of information about each agency's FOIA process, the FOIA generally, and also all of the annual FOIA report data, as well as the work of the Chief FOIA Officer Council. And in addition, we support and are very proud to have led a number of government-wide initiatives, all aimed at improving how FOIA can become more effective, more efficient, and also help meet the mission that requesters are able to get the information they need to engage with their government. Next slide. So I briefly wanted to touch on a number of FOIA initiatives over the past, since 2011, that have been included in the U.S. Open Government National Action Plans. So this is FOIA, as you can see, is so fundamental to open government. It's been in 4 of the last 5 U.S. national action plans. And these are some of the initiatives that we've spearheaded and executed as part of those plans. First here, we had, as I said, it's over 100 agencies at different times over the years. And each agency has a different FOIA regulation that dictates the requirements for FOIA at that agency and explains the process of FOIA. And so in order to alleviate some of the frustration of having inconsistent FOIA regulations, some that were out of date, we pursued an initiative to develop common FOIA regulation guidance that agencies use and now are much more consistent in their FOIA regulations. We also conducted a pilot and finished an assessment on a proactive disclosure policy of releasing records that have been processed to one requester to all online. We also established a best practices workshop, and this is in like 2011, and it's been ongoing, where we bring agencies that have had particular success in different areas of FOIA, bring them together to have a workshop discussion to share their best practices to the government as a whole. NARA also established the FOIA Federal Advisory Committee, which has been ongoing for a number of years, a number of terms, in order to foster dialogue between the requester community and the government to develop recommendations on how we can improve agencies' administration of the FOIA. And we also develop, as I said, at the core of making sure that transparency laws like FOIA work effectively is making sure that everyone who has an obligation under the FOIA knows their responsibilities and how to implement them. And here, the Department of Justice, we've long said that FOIA is everyone's responsibility. So we developed e-learning training modules that cover the entire workforce, a separate training module for senior executives, one for the entire federal workforce, all the program specialists and subject matter experts that are creating the records that we process, and a very in-depth one for FOIA professionals, so that we have consistent and a big resource for training for all agencies. Next slide. And we're very proud to have nearly completed the commitments that we had in the most recent National Action Plan, the 5th one. Last year, we updated our self-assessment toolkit, which it's a toolkit that provides agencies a comprehensive and objective way to assess each part of their FOIA program, from the intake of requests to the search for records, processing of records. In this past year, we updated that toolkit to include new modules on proactive disclosures, administrative appeals, and incorporated throughout it the need for technology. Next, we are trying to standardize, the business standards for FOIA technology to help agencies be able to acquire the technology that meets their needs, and also inform industry of the needs of agencies when technology specific to FOIA. And we working with GSA, we are just published and just closed out we published for public comment on regulations.gov and just close that out and look forward to finalizing those. And then finally, we were very excited to launch our search tool on FOIA.gov, our new search tool, which using machine learning allows the public to easily either find the records they're looking that's already been posted online, or directing them to the right agency or location where they should make a request for those records. Next slide. So some things that we learned and some best practices that I think were critical to the success of the initiatives that we have had, certainly a regular engagement with civil society. And we've leveraged two defined bodies that we have in FOIA, our Chief FOIA Officer Council, as well as the Federal FOIA Advisory Committee I mentioned that was established as NARA, is getting input, and also specific input when we have established an initiative, getting specific input from both civil society and public. A big thing that we've been pushing for a number of years is communication with requesters. and have been encouraging agencies to both within the request processing process, communicate regularly, but also outside conducting outreach to agency, to civil society and regular members of the public that regularly make requests to them. And especially with our FOIA technology, our FOIA website and the FOIA search tool, we always take a very user-centered design approach, soliciting public input as we're developing and continuing to refine different iterations of the website and also for example, the search tool. Next slide. And finally, it's also been critical because FOIA is a responsibility of the agencies, and it's an asset for the public. It's also really important. We found that we have good collaboration with agencies, particularly given that there is over 120 agencies with diverse types of records and volumes of records that they're processing. And so for each of our initiatives, we work very closely with agencies through the Chief FOIA Officer Council, especially on developing many of the initiatives that we committed to. And we really did focus also on developing common standards, for example, for our reporting. Also, we've done that for our FOIA websites, but we're planning to build on that, and especially FOIA logs. And as I mentioned, our work with the business standards. And so we look forward to continuing to build on all of these efforts. And with that, I thank you. I turn it over to my colleague, Phil Lamb.
Hello, everyone. My name is Phil. I am with the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, or FinCEN. I apologize, I don't have any slides. So hopefully I can share a little bit about what we're doing around encouraging transparency on the business level and how we're operationalizing this program in an open process. So FinCEN, or our acronym for Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, is a part of the Department of Treasury, which is a component of our Office of Terrorism and Financial Intelligence. And so I'm here to talk a bit about our implementation of a new federal law called the Corporate Transparency Act that will bring transparency to the actual owners of businesses here in the US and how we've been doing that. So first, what is the Corporate Transparency Act, or CTA, and why is it important? The goal of the bipartisan CTA is to protect US economic and national security by establishing a registrar of businesses and the actual people that own or substantially control them. So for those of you who are tracking this, this is a challenge that we've had for many decades. This is a global problem where there are anonymous shell companies out there that use these companies to launder money, to evade sanctions and other illicit activities. And here in the US, businesses are created at the state and local level. And in many of these states, creating that business does not require any additional information about who are the people that own them. So for example, a business can be created that is owned by another business. And that's kind of where it stops. And so here we've had a challenge with law enforcement where they're looking into a potential shady business. And it takes sometimes months, sometimes years to sort of uncover the layers of shells so that they can appropriately investigate and prosecute some of these entities. So how do we tackle this problem? As I was saying before, this is not a new challenge. And so an international group was convened. They're called the Financial Action Task Force. They developed recommendations on how to battle this. And one of the core ones is to develop a nationwide registry that does what the CTA describes. And so I'm proud to say that starting this year, the US now has an operational registry. We have over 2 million filings already this year. And so we're just starting on this route. I'm very glad I'm here actually because I'm learning about all the work that you all are doing around sort of getting appropriate feedback from the public. I would love to have a conversation about more lessons learned there. But the way that we went about going forward with operationalizing this is through public comment. As a regulator, we have sort of standard processes and how we do that. And so when we go forward with publishing a rule, we have a notice of proposed rulemaking beforehand, put in the Federal Register. We take those comments back. And we issue the final rules, we like to not only talk about the rule as it stands, but our thinking behind it, how we got there and how we've thought about some of the public comments. And this is just some of the ways that as an agency, we've been trying to take and feed in public comment. And of course, as we're operational, we are collecting feedback from the federal, from the public via our online sources and are looking to improve upon that. But I'm seeing Jen pop up and I'm guessing we're way over time. So thank you so much for the opportunity. And if there are any questions or concerns or what have you, please feel free to reach out. Thanks, Jen.
Thanks so much, Phil. I didn't mean to rush you. FinCEN's doing such amazing work, and I'd like to thank our federal colleagues. This is, again, just a smattering of the kinds of efforts that are happening across our federal government. There are many more. There are many more that are not necessarily represented in our National Action Plan and in the commitments that many of you have seen. And our hope is to elevate that work going forward. And speaking of elevation, I'd like to just very quickly, we're moving into the closing here. We're going to tie this back to the U.S. Participation in the Open Government Partnership and the reason for this event, which is that it is Open Gov Week, a special project of the Open Government Partnership, where we are looking to elevate these issues, celebrate open government actions, and connect people. And so I'd like to turn this back to Dan in his capacity as the director of the U.S. Open Government Secretariat, which was only stood up about 6-8 months ago. Very exciting work. Some brief words from Dan, and then I'll close us out with just a touch point on our global efforts. Over to you, Dan.
Great, thank you. And I'll take my 35 minutes of comments. No, I'm kidding. I won't be anywhere near that. I just want to thank everyone again for today's panel. Very blessed to be here at the Open Government Secretariat to be able to help manage the domestic aspects of our participation in the Open Government Partnership, from the national action plans to the Federal Advisory Committee we're standing up, but also to be able to help being a convening body for events like this and others. So I put in the chat that we've already posted the agenda and the presentation for today's event on our website. So if you want to see the chat and go check those out, you can. The video and notes will be a little further along, probably the next week or so. But thank you so much to Jen and to the panelists and to our local partners for being able to make it today. And I look forward to seeing you again soon. Go ahead, take it away, Jen.
Great, thanks so much. And in case you're not following the U.S. Open Government Secretariat, stay tuned. We know there'll be a new webpage, lots of new exciting work, and of course our new Federal Advisory Committee, which is open. So please feel free to spread the word on that. I'd just like to take a few minutes to take us back to the global level, again, why we're here today. As mentioned earlier, we partner very closely with GSA. I should mention that I am now speaking in my capacity as the Senior Advisor for anti-corruption at USAID, where I lead our work on open government at the global level. So USAID, the State Department, and GSA have been working collaboratively together for many years. Most recently, the three agencies came together to launch our candidacy as the United States for the OGP Steering Committee, which functions as the board, so to speak, of the OGP partnership at the global level. We were elected in 2023 to a 3-year term on this OGP leadership, this OGP leadership role. All three agencies represent the United States on the steering committee, and it's been a great collaboration to date. And part of this renewed global role is really about building on longstanding and robust U.S. support for OGP. OGP is all about promoting transparency and accountability. It serves as a tool to further a wide variety of U.S. foreign and national policy democracy priorities. And so for that reason, both the Department of State and USAID have partnered together for many years in leading our global engagement with and support for OGP. On the State Department side, this has included spearheading international engagement on OGP priorities and continuing to promote OGP as an essential platform for some of our shared values in the democracy space, including using our diplomatic engagement to really elevate this issue and enhance collaboration among U.S. agencies that are involved in these pieces. On the USAID side, our agency has provided support to OGP at the global level and at the country level. At the global level, this includes promoting the partnership, sustaining it, and spearheading real action made on the commitments that are made in the global space. And at the country level, our missions in 90 plus countries around the world are providing direct support to advance the kind of commitments we heard about today here in the United States that are happening in countries around the world, in cities around the world, municipalities, territories, states, to advance democracy, to advance community engagement and participation and transparency, ultimately to enhance that trust that democracy is there to deliver for people. So I'd like to thank everyone for being here today. This was a really exciting first foray into connecting these various pieces. I encourage you to look at the rest of the OpenGov events that are happening around the world. There's lots of great presentations, lots of great learning. And I'd like to most especially thank our co-hosts at GSA at the U.S. Open Government Secretariat and all of our panelists. Have a wonderful day and happy OpenGov Week.
Thank you all again. Bye.